McKenna was a 35-year-old woman with long black hair that gracefully fell over her shoulders and brown eyes that sparkled with kindness and compassion. Her beauty went beyond physical appearance, reflecting in her generosity and love for others. Everyone in the community admired McKenna for her dedication to helping others. She had a huge heart and always found time in her busy life to make a difference in the lives of those around her. One of her favorite activities was bringing gifts to the local orphanage. It was part of her charity routine, a way to bring a little joy and hope to children who had no family. On that sunny afternoon, McKenna carefully and lovingly prepared the gifts. This time she was going to visit an orphanage in a nearby town. It was the first time she would go there. She chose colorful toys, warm winter clothes, and even some children's books, imagining the children's smiles as they received their gifts. Upon arriving at the orphanage, McKenna was greeted with enthusiasm by the children. They ran around her, curious to see what she had brought that week. McKenna distributed the gifts with joy, savoring every moment with the children. It was then that her eyes met those of a particular boy. His mischievous smile lit up his face, his blue eyes shining with innocence, and his black hair falling disheveled over his forehead. Curious, McKenna approached the boy and handed him a toy. He thanked her with a gentle smile, revealing a missing front tooth, which made him even more adorable. She asked his name, and he replied that it was Zane. At his 6 years of age, Zane had something captivating in his gaze, something that seemed strangely familiar to McKenna. It was as if she already knew him from somewhere, but she couldn't identify from where. Days later, McKenna was at her in-law's house, where her mother-in-law Mary was excitedly looking at old photographs of her children when they were young. Among the photos, Mary picked up one in particular of Chima, her husband, with black hair, bright blue eyes, and a mischievous smile on his face. As she looked at the photo, McKenna felt a strange sense of familiarity. That image seemed so real, as if she had seen that boy before, but she couldn't remember where. The captivating smile and mischievous expression of Chima in the photo were so similar to Zane, the boy from the orphanage, that they left her intrigued, but she quickly pushed those thoughts out of her head. McKenna decided to return to the orphanage in the neighboring town a few days later. She brought more gifts and donations, eager to meet Zane again. Upon arriving, McKenna looked for the boy and found him sitting, focused on fixing a toy car. His eyes were focused, he seemed serious and determined to complete the task. In a moment of deep concentration, he scratched his chin and furrowed his brow, a gesture that reminded her a lot of her husband Chima, who had the same habit when he was too focused or worried about something. The physical resemblance between Zane and Chima, combined with the similar gestures, made McKenna question even more. Was it just a coincidence, or was there something more? The answer seemed increasingly distant, leaving her even more intrigued and determined to uncover the truth. Days passed, and McKenna couldn't get those thoughts out of her head. Her mind was immersed in a whirlwind of doubts and questions. She knew she couldn't tell anyone, especially her husband. He would think she was crazy, and she herself was beginning to question the sanity of her thoughts. McKenna wondered if she was really right in her suspicions. Even if her husband had committed infidelity, why would the child be in an orphanage, and not with the mother? Did he know about the existence of the boy? Had he abandoned him because he wasn't a legitimate son? No, Chima wouldn't be capable of that, she convinced herself. But what if he was? What if everything she believed about him was wrong? These questions consumed her, causing her to rethink every detail of their relationship and the story they shared. One night after dinner, Chima moved his right arm to scratch his wrist, revealing a small birthmark. McKenna noticed it immediately, even though she had seen that mark before. Chima noticed her gaze, and before she could say anything, he explained, "It's a birthmark. Everyone in my family has one. You remember, even my sister has it." McKenna agreed, trying to disguise her true concern. That simple mark became an obsession for McKenna. On her next day off, she decided she would go to the orphanage to check if Zane also had that same birthmark. It was a clue that could confirm her suspicions, but it also frightened her with the possibility of what she might discover. Finally, McKenna's day off arrived, and she didn't hesitate to head to the orphanage. Anxiously, she looked for Zane, trying to disguise her true intentions. She couldn't just grab the boy's arm, she needed to be subtle in her approach. She found Zayn playing with other children, and when he saw her, he smiled openly with his bright, captivating blue eyes. He ran to hug her. Makena returned the hug, liking the boy very much. For a moment, she allowed herself to be enveloped by Zayn's joy and innocence, almost forgetting the reason for her visit. However, when she remembered, she didn't even need to grab the boy's arm. Zayn was scratching his wrist exactly the same way Chima had done days ago. With a quick glance, Makena found the unthinkable. The same birthmark that was on her husband's wrist was also on the boy's wrist. They were identical, differing only in size. Makena was in shock. Now there were too many similarities and coincidences. Secretly, she found a way to take a picture of the boy's wrist, although she wasn't sure why she did it. Now the question was what to do next. This discovery stirred a mix of emotions in Makena. She felt happy to be there helping the children at the orphanage, but at the same time, a concern began to settle in her heart. The idea that the boy could be Chima's son, the result of an affair, haunted her terribly. She tried to push these thoughts aside, focusing on enjoying her time with the children. However, the doubt persisted in her mind, causing her to question the truth behind that striking resemblance. Makena was growing distant from Chima, unable to speak to him as the mere idea of an affair broke her heart. She avoided looking at him, turned away when he tried to kiss her, and always avoided intimacy, claiming to feel unwell. In 10 years of marriage, this had never happened, and she knew he had noticed. Since the beginning of their relationship, she had made it clear to Chima that infidelity would be the end of their relationship. They should be loyal and faithful. If the relationship was not going well, they would talk and try to fix it, and if it wasn't possible, they would separate, but there was no need to cheat. These values were the foundation of the love and trust they had built over the years. Makena needed to resolve this issue that tormented her. One day, during a break at work, she confided in her best friend Christina, telling her everything about her suspicions and discoveries. Listened attentively, knowing Chima well, having been visiting their house for years. She couldn't imagine he would be capable of cheating on Makena, as they loved each other so much. However, she couldn't deny that Makena had some plausible elements, although they didn't prove the child's paternity. Christina pondered that the situation was delicate. If Chima were innocent, he would be offended. Using rationality, she suggested that Makena take a DNA test. She had a friend who owned a laboratory who could expedite the process. Christina advised that after receiving the test result, Makena should talk to her husband regardless of the outcome. After all, Chima deserved to know what was going on, even if the result was negative. Makena agreed and took it upon herself to collect the samples to take to the laboratory. Chima noticed Makena's strange behavior. She seemed distant, always thoughtful, as if something was bothering her, but she didn't say what it was. He tried to ask, but she only said she was tired, worried about work issues. Makena was a nurse, and her routine included working at the hospital, taking care of the house, and charity work in orphanages, something she wouldn't give up. Chima, on the other hand, was a software developer. He had his own office in a commercial building, but sometimes he worked from home. The first time he noticed Makena's behavior, he let it go. After all, he also had his own concerns, but as the days went by, he realized that something was really bothering his wife. She avoided him. They barely kissed, let alone made love. He tried to remember if he had done something wrong, but nothing came to mind. Intrigued, Chima looked for a way to talk to Makena, who was now more closed off and irritable. He needed to find out what was bothering her so they could solve this issue together. Unfortunately, he had to travel for work, leaving this conversation for when he returned. It would be a week away, and he really didn't want to go. But he had no choice, as it was a very important client and his partner was away due to his wife's serious health problem. Before the trip, Chima noticed something intriguing. Makena seemed relieved by his absence. This observation left him even more confused. Had she grown tired of him? Was she having an affair? No, Chima knew that Makena was loyal and would never do such a thing. They loved each other, they had always been partners, friends, and lovers. What had changed then? He needed these answers, but he knew they would have to wait until he returned. He couldn't talk to his wife on the phone. Makena got the samples for the DNA tests, which would be ready in 7 days. She received the news of her husband's trip with relief, as she would have exactly the time she needed to get the answers she was looking for. The solitude of the empty house was now her ally, providing the necessary space to deal with her emotions and plan the next steps. The result of the DNA test was finally in her hands, and Makena could feel her heart racing with anticipation. She sat at the kitchen table, where she used to share meals with Chima, but now the space between them seemed larger than ever. With trembling hands, Makena opened the envelope and carefully read every word of the document. Tears filled her eyes as she confirmed her deepest suspicions. Zane was indeed Chima's son. An overwhelming mix of emotions swept over her, from betrayal to disappointment and pain. The result of the DNA test was a harsh blow for Makena. Sitting in her living room, looking at the paper that confirmed Chima's paternity over Zane, she felt an overwhelming mix of emotions. On one hand, there was a deep affection for Zane. He was just an innocent child, a victim of this complicated situation. She remembered his smiles, his playfulness, how he had grown attached to her. But on the other hand, he was also proof of Chima's betrayal, a wound that seemed to never heal. Makena knew she couldn't simply ignore the truth. She loved Chima, but betrayal had always been a non-negotiable limit in their relationship. He knew this from the start, yet he still chose to betray her. She wondered how to tell Chima the truth. She knew it would be the end of their marriage. There was no turning back after this revelation. Trust had been broken in an irreparable way. Looking at the pictures of Chima and Zane, Makena felt a deep pain in her chest. She knew what she needed to do, but that didn't make the decision any easier. She would have to confront Chima and face the end of their marriage, a prospect that terrified her. But above all, she knew she needed to be true to herself and to her principles. Makena gathered all the evidence, the photos, and the DNA test, and waited for Chima. He would be back from his trip today. She had already sent a message letting him know she had just landed and was taking a taxi home. The lack of response from Makena made Chima uneasy. She had avoided him all week, always too busy, or the few times she answered the phone, she was monosyllabic. Something was definitely wrong, and as he headed home, he felt a tightness in his chest that he couldn't explain, hoping it wasn't a harbinger of something bad. Makena was determined to confront Chima. She called him for a serious conversation in the living room, where everything would be revealed. With trembling hands, she handed him the envelope containing the DNA test result and some photos of Zane. Chima, confused and surprised, opened the envelope and read the document carefully. His eyes widened as he realized the truth that the words revealed. Before he could say anything, Makena showed him the photos of the boy. "Look at him." "Chima," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "He is your son." Chima looked at the photos, then at Makena, and then back at the photos again. He seemed stunned, unable to process the enormity of what was before him. Makena couldn't contain her emotions any longer. She began to cry, tears streaming down her face as she expressed all her pain and disappointment. "You know what hurt the most, Chima?" she asked, her voice heavy with sadness. "Zane is 6 years old, the same age our son would have been if he hadn't died after birth. While I was grieving the loss of our son, you were out there having a child with someone else. How could you do this to me? How could you betray me like this?" Makena questioned Chima about why Zane was in the orphanage, why he wasn't with his mother if he was his legitimate son. The questions echoed in the room, filling the air with a heavy silence laden with emotion. The confrontation between Makena and Chima was devastating. Chima was stunned, unable to believe what was happening. He tried to argue, to explain, to plead for Makena's trust, but his words seemed to be lost in the void. "I swear, Makena, I swear I didn't cheat on you," he said, his eyes full of tears. "I don't know how this happened. I don't know who this boy is, but I know I didn't cheat on you, Makena. I love you. I would never do something like this." Makena, however, was adamant. The evidence was clear, undeniable. She couldn't simply ignore the truth that was before her. Betrayal had always been a boundary for her, a boundary that Chima seemed to have crossed. "I can't do this anymore, Chima," she said, her voice choked with pain. I can't continue with someone who has broken my trust like this. I want a divorce. The words fell like a sentence, sealing the fate of their marriage. Makena asked Chima to leave the house, at least temporarily, until they could resolve the bureaucratic issues of the divorce. She advised him to visit the boy at the orphanage to fulfill his duties as a father, even though he didn't know how it had happened. Chima, desperate, grabbed his suitcase, the same one he had barely unpacked from the previous trip, and left for a hotel. He was devastated, completely lost in the midst of this upheaval in his life. He had never imagined that something like this could happen, that he could lose Makena for something he swore he hadn't done. Meanwhile, Makena was alone in the house that had once been their home, surrounded by memories of a love that now seemed so distant. She knew it wouldn't be easy to move on, but she also knew she couldn't live a lie anymore. The truth, painful as it was the only thing that mattered now. At the hotel, Chima was in a whirlwind of emotions. The idea that he could have a child outside of marriage was unimaginable to him. He replayed every moment of his life, trying to find some logical explanation for this situation. The birthmark, the physical resemblance to the boy, everything seemed to point in the same direction. However, Chima knew in his heart that he had never cheated on Makena. He loved her more than anything and would never jeopardize their marriage. Determined to clarify the situation, Chima went to the orphanage where Zain was. When he saw the boy, something stirred inside him. Zain was the spitting image of Chima as a child. There was an inexplicable connection between them. Introducing himself as Makena's husband, Chima could perceive the affection Zain had for his wife. It touched his heart deeply. Doubts and emotions consuming him, Chima decided he needed to investigate this story thoroughly. He couldn't accept that his marriage would end like this. There was something bigger at play, something he still couldn't understand, but was determined to uncover. Chima chose to speak with the orphanage director, a kind and hopeful woman who saw in Zain the chance for a happy adoption. She spoke about the boy with enthusiasm, mentioning how special he was. Those words echoed in Chima's mind as he mentally noted down every piece of information she provided. The director explained about Zain's age and the challenge of adoption for older children. She had a good feeling about Zain and the possibility of him being adopted by the couple. The physical resemblance between Zain and Chima was striking, something the director had also noticed. As he listened to the director, Chima reflected on his encounter with Zain. The fondness he felt for the boy was genuine, but how could he be his son? He mowed over in his mind every detail, every conversation with Makena, trying to understand how it was possible without him having cheated on his wife. When Chima left the orphanage, his mind was in turmoil. He had a clue about Zain's birth date, but he still couldn't put all the pieces of this confusing puzzle together. Was Zain really his son? How could he explain this to Makena? Doubts and uncertainties consumed him, and he knew he needed to find answers before confronting his wife. Chima was lost in his thoughts, stunned by the absurd possibility that was beginning to take shape in his mind. He needed help to understand what was happening. He decided to seek out his friend Liam, a trusted lawyer, and share his doubts and suspicions. Upon finding Liam in his office, Chima presented the materials Makena had given him and began to tell his theory. He spoke with a mixture of anxiety and disbelief, describing how the DNA test indicated that Zain was his son, even though he was certain he had never cheated on Makena. Liam listened attentively, but his expression was one of skepticism. He questioned whether Chima was absolutely certain of his fidelity, something Chima vehemently affirmed. Convinced by his friend's conviction, Liam suggested a new DNA test to confirm his theory. He knew that concrete evidence was essential for dealing with such a delicate situation. Thus, Liam tasked Chima with gathering the necessary materials for the new tests while considering the next steps to be taken. Uncertainty hung in the air, and Chima knew that the answers could completely change his life and his marriage. Meanwhile, Makena, unaware of her husband's investigation, was immersed in deep sadness. The days seemed colorless since she discovered Chima's betrayal. To love him so much and to be betrayed in this way was a pain that seemed unbearable. The idea that her marriage had crumbled left a void in her chest, a void she didn't know how to fill. She had not yet filed for divorce. She needed time to process everything that was happening. Since that fateful confrontation about Zane's paternity, she had not seen Chima. For a moment, she considered the possibility of believing him. He seemed sincere in his denial, and his hurt look as he left home still echoed in her mind. However, the evidence was overwhelming. The photos, the DNA test. How could he not be Zane's biological father? Nonetheless, Chima, feeling offended and hurt by the situation, still troubled her. How dare he feel that way when he was the one who broke the marriage vows? Days ago, their housekeeper contacted her to inform that Chima needed to go to their house to pick up some documents. McKenna didn't care much about the news. She knew these visits would be necessary for a while, but she asked the housekeeper to make sure she wasn't at home when he came. She simply didn't want to see him, at least not for now. Chima awaited the test result anxiously. He had scheduled a meeting with Liam, as they said the result would be out today around 2 p.m. His heart was pounding, the uncertainty about the result making him fearful. When he finally received the envelope with the result, his hands trembled as he opened it. His eyes scanned the lines of the document, and suddenly his face lit up. "I knew it," he murmured to himself, as if that was the confirmation of something he had always believed. Showing the result to Liam, the friend could hardly believe what he was seeing. "This is incredible," Liam said, astonished by the turn of events. "Are you going to talk to McKenna?" Liam asked, curious about Chima's next steps. "Yes, I need to talk to her," Chima replied, carefully storing the result. "But we need to delve into the second part of the investigation. We need to know how this could have happened, Liam." "I agree," Liam said, thoughtful. "I'll take the necessary steps and request priority in this case. I believe we won't have any problems, as this could cause a scandal and bad publicity for them. They should cooperate." McKenna decided to visit Zane at the orphanage. It had been days since she last saw the boy, and she missed him dearly. McKenna was emotional as she reunited with Zane at the orphanage. The boy hugged her affectionately, and she melted at his innocent smile. She felt a deep love for him, even knowing now that he was Chima's son. The situation was bittersweet because, on one hand, she loved Zane and wanted the best for him, but on the other, it hurt to know that he was the product of her husband's betrayal. As she spent time with Zane, McKenna tried to push thoughts of Chima away. She didn't want to ruin the special moment with the boy, but it was hard to ignore her husband's presence in their lives, even though soon he would be her ex-husband. Meanwhile, Chima was desperate to talk to McKenna. He knew he needed to explain everything and try to fix things between them. Upon finding out she was at the orphanage, he hurried there as quickly as he could. When Chima arrived, he saw McKenna and Zane together, and his heart swelled with emotion. He approached and hugged the boy, feeling a mix of happiness and anxiety. Seeing the scene of father and son embracing, McKenna felt a pang in her heart. On one hand, she was happy to see Zane so well cared for and loved, but on the other, she knew this meant the end of their marriage. She knew it was time to face reality and talk to Chima about the divorce. Even though it hurt, she needed to confront the situation head-on. Chima noticed McKenna's hesitation and asked her to stay. He knew he needed to explain everything and hoped she would understand. The three of them stood there in silence for a moment before Chima finally broke the silence. "McKenna, we need to talk," he said, his voice firm but filled with emotion. "I know things are complicated between us, but there's something important you need to know." In a private area at the orphanage, they both sat down to have this conversation. McKenna was tense, awaiting the revelation Chima was about to make. He took a deep breath, took her hands and said with a trembling voice, "McKenna, I know everything seems confusing and painful right now, but there's something I found out in the tests that will change everything. Zane, he's not just my son. He's also your son." McKenna's eyes widened, unable to believe what she was hearing. Chima handed her the DNA test results, showing that they were both Zane's biological parents. Tears welled up in McKenna's eyes, mixing with a whirlwind of emotions. She looked at Zane, who was innocently playing outside, and then at Chima, who was looking at her with a mix of hope and apprehension. "How is this? How is this possible?" McKenna murmured, still stunned by the revelation. Chima replied that Liam was investigating the case and that it was likely a hospital mistake, a baby switch, or something similar. He had just picked up the results and couldn't help but share this discovery with her. McKenna looked at Zane with new eyes, seeing familiar traits in him that she hadn't noticed before. She felt a whirlwind of emotions, but above all, a sense of relief and gratitude for having her son back. McKenna looked into Chima's eyes, holding his hands firmly. Chima, I'm sorry for not believing in you. I was so quick to judge, to think the worst, but now I know the truth, and I know you have always been faithful to me. Forgive me for doubting you. Chima smiled gently, brushing her face with his hand. McKenna, there's nothing to forgive. I understand your reaction given the circumstances. The important thing is that we're together now, and we can move forward stronger than ever. They embraced, feeling the connection and love that had always been there, even in the toughest times. I love you, Chima, McKenna whispered. And I love you, McKenna, always and forever, Chima replied, sealing his words with a gentle kiss. Our son, Chima. Zane is our son, McKenna said, her voice choked with emotion. He looked at Zane, who was innocently playing on the floor, and then back at McKenna. Yes, let's get him out of here as soon as possible. Liam is already taking care of it too, Chima continued, holding his wife's hand. Given the circumstances, they were granted temporary custody of Zane. The family was finally reunited, but the discoveries were far from over. Days later, Liam discovered that there had been a mistake at the hospital, and the babies had been switched. Zane had been switched with the baby of a 16-year-old girl. The baby who died was hers, not McKenna's, as everyone had believed. This confusion led to the girl's deceased son being mistakenly identified as McKenna and Chima's child. Upon leaving the hospital, the young girl gave the child up for adoption. Due to Zane's health issues, it was difficult to find parents who could afford his medical treatment. That's why he stayed at the orphanage until he reached an age where it was hard to be adopted. The orphanage could only afford Zane's treatments due to the donations they received. Chima and McKenna decided to tell Zane the truth. They sat together on the couch and explained the whole situation to the boy. Zane was a little confused at first, but soon he smiled and hugged his parents. The family would now live the lost time with much love and happiness. Zane had a new family, and Chima and McKenna had the son they had always wanted. The house was filled with laughter and love, showing that even in the face of the greatest challenges, true love always prevails. The sunlight illuminated the room where Chima, McKenna, and Zane were gathered. Zane played with his toys while Chima and McKenna exchanged loving glances, still incredulous about everything they had been through. Zane looked up, his eyes shining with joy, and called out, "Daddy, Mommy." Chima and McKenna looked at each other, moved, and approached the boy. Zane hugged them tightly, feeling safe and loved. "Zane, my son, we love you so much," McKenna said, tears in her eyes. "Yes, Zane, we love you so much. We are so happy to have you with us," Chima said, holding McKenna's and Zane's hands. The family was united, finally complete. Love and happiness overflowed in that room, showing that even in the face of the most challenging challenges, true love always finds its way. Zane's smile was a reflection of the new life they were starting together. Embraced, Chima and McKenna left behind the hurt and distrust, strengthening their love and union even more. They enjoyed the presence of the son they loved so much and whom they thought they had lost. It was still crazy to think about all this, but for now they just wanted to enjoy these wonderful family moments together. They walked towards a future full of happiness and fulfillment, knowing that they were united and strong to face any challenge life had in store for them. Moral of the story: in the face of betrayal and heartbreak, trust and love can find a way to heal. Unexpected discoveries can lead to deeper connections and understanding. True love prevails through the toughest trials. Family bonds, even when tested, can emerge stronger and more resilient.